When Star Wars Outlaws was released, a lot of people weren't expecting the game to do too well, but then after it finally was released, it performed much worse than what many were imagining. In fact, I thought it was going to do better than what it did, but the game was a huge disaster. Of course, Ubisoft was trying to hide this fact and trying to make it seem as if like, oh no, the game's doing fine, or maybe it's not performing as well as we would have liked, but we're still happy with the results. Then the game was finally released on Steam, and then we got some hard numbers to go off of, because when you're just talking about actual sales figures, the companies usually like to keep that pretty close to the chest, and the actual sales figures are more or less, you have to go by insider information and rumors and other things like that. But when a game is released on Steam, well, then you can actually see the concurrent player count and get actual figures about how good or bad the game is doing. And when this was released on Steam, it was doing pretty bad. Now, Ubisoft is left with one of two choices. They can either A, try to make better games in order to get more people to play them, or B, try to find some other way to hide the numbers so people don't know how bad their games are doing. And they're trying to select the B option here because, according to these latest reports, Ubisoft is reportedly trying to pressure Steam into removing the concurrent player count from their website in order to hide the fact that their games are huge failures. Ubisoft reportedly pressures Steam to get rid of concurrent player count after Star Wars Outlaws' disastrous debut. Now, this isn't the first time companies like this will pressure a site online in order to try to remove some of the information. We've seen that with other places like Rotten Tomatoes, for instance. YouTube removed the dislike meter unless you actually have a browser extension for that. But this is the first time that we've seen companies like Ubisoft trying to pressure Steam into removing that, because it's pretty obvious that everything that they're putting out, people are just rejecting, and they don't want to have a lot of these hard figures to go off of when people are saying how bad Ubisoft games actually are. Ubisoft is reportedly pressuring Steam to get rid of its concurrent player count feature following the disastrous launch of Star Wars Outlaws on the platform. The story was first broken by Fandom Pulse, citing an inside source close to Ubisoft that alleges that the company sees such a public display of its failures as embarrassing in front of both players and investors. And I think that's an important factor to be considered here, because they understand they're not making money off of players if they release a terrible game, but they can still make money from investors if investors have confidence in the studio and thinks that the studio is actually doing well. And in the past, they probably would be lying to investors or trying to tweak their books in order to make it seem as if their games are doing a lot better. I mean, I would almost consider that fraud, but there's ways you can get around that sort of thing. But now that we can see the numbers on Steam, well, then suddenly they can't hide how bad that they're actually doing. And investors, after Star Wars Outlaws was launched, we saw were fleeing the company, and their stock value became nearly a company wide, or pretty much an all-time low for them. Not quite, but close to it. Ubisoft and other companies want to pressure Steam to stop the tracker from giving out info they want to keep to themselves. The source told Fandom Pulse they want to be able to present findings to investors so they can make it sound good. In other words, Steam's transparency makes it difficult for Ubisoft to lie. And that's really the only thing I can get from this. That's the only reason why a company would want to argue against transparency, because they don't want to be honest with the audience and their investors. Take Star Wars Outlaws as a prime example of this phenomenon at work. The troubled title has reportedly failed to move 2 million copies worldwide across all platforms. It debuted last week on Steam, and many wondered if the deeply unpopular game would find its audience on PC. It did not. And that's one thing I could say in defense of these horrible Steam numbers for it, because it wasn't released the same day as the console release on Steam. So maybe anyone who wanted to play it decided to get it on a console, so there's few people left to play it on Steam. That's a possibility, but still, you want to see numbers as low as what they're actually reporting. And also, failing to move 2 million copies is disastrous for this, because pretty recently, one of the executives over at Ubisoft actually said in the AAA gaming sphere, a game needs to move around 10 million copies in order for it to be profitable, because they cost so much to produce a lot of these games. So when they're failing to move 2 million copies, this is just, I don't know how many times I can say this is just a disaster for the company. Ubisoft typically tries to work some revisionist history magic when it suffers a massive failure. For example, in response to the soft sales for Outlaws, it attempted to tout critical response and review scores that favor the title. Yeah, and we even saw in the lead up to the release of that, they were flying out influencers and critics and stuff like that to Disney, taking them on whale watching tours and basically trying to wine and dine them and hope that they can get good reviews until it came out that no, that's what they were actually doing. Some people kind of blew the whistle on them. And then that really blew up in their face and they had to deal with all that backlash as well. Ubisoft went as far as to describe this disastrous rollout as the birth of one of the most immersive experiences of the Star Wars universe ever created. To an investor, that can sound impressive and inspire the false confidence of Ubisoft's needs right now. Yeah, that's probably why they don't like it when people actually blow the whistle on what they're doing. However, due to Steam's transparency, investors can clearly see how many people are playing the game. There's no spin possible, and in the case of Star Wars Outlaws, the public results tell a very clear story. Now, just look at these numbers they have right here. All-time peak, just under 2,500 players for a game like this. That's pretty bad. I mean, you need to have hundreds of thousands of players on something like this. To say they're underperforming is putting it lightly. To be frank, the game bombed in its debut weekend, falling short of 2,500 concurrent players on Steam. The title is also already listed at 25% off in the Steam store, which tells you everything you need to know about how Star Wars Outlaws is selling. It's currently ranked 66 on the Steam bestseller list. That's not what you would expect from a game with Star Wars in the title. And to be fair too, the concurrent player count isn't the only way to measure whether a game is successful or not. Like I said before, a lot of it, you have to just go by rumors and insider information in order to try to get an idea if a game is succeeding or not. But there's a lot of other charts online, like on Steam, for instance, and like anticipation lists and stuff like that, where you can see if there's any hype surrounding a new release. And for Star Wars Outlaws, the hype was actually pretty minimal. So it's pretty fair to say that this game wasn't going to do well, but the whole Steam concurrent player count just shows some hard figures that there is no denying it. Ubisoft also admitted in the past that to achieve profitability, AAA games need to sell somewhere around 4 or 5 million copies. That means if 2 million sales figures is true, not only has Outlaws failed to turn a profit, it was never anywhere close. And yeah, they've also said it needs to sell 4 to 5 million copies. It was later on that Mark Kute said that you need to actually sell 10 million copies. The exact figures are ambiguous on this one. I mean, he was just kind of being a little bit hyperbolic, but still, if they need going by this, they say they need to sell at least 4 million copies. 2 million copies that they sold for this is still abysmally low. If the rumors are true, it would seem unlikely that Steam would give in to the pressure from Ubisoft. The gaming community would be incensed at such an act, as concurrent player counts give gamers an idea of what new games are popular and worthy of a look. And that's also something you need to consider when it comes to a lot of games that feature heavy multiplayers, because if you want to play a multiplayer game, but there's just not many people playing it online, well, then no point in actually doing this, because like, yeah, you want to jump into something that you need other players to play with and no one's playing it online, well, then you're not going to be playing that game. So the concurrent player count isn't just something that people can go by to gauge whether or not a game is successful. It's actually vital in some instances. For Concord, I think is a good example of that, because that was a live shooter game and no one was playing that, and I think that was a large contributor as to the fact that the game ended up failing, because a lot of people were like, well, this is a online shooter game, no one's playing this game, so no point in getting invested in it because I'm not even going to have anyone to play with. But as far as Ubisoft goes, things just haven't been looking good for them in recent years, with a lot of their games just failing to catch on. Star Wars Outlaws is just the latest example of it, and I think Ubisoft probably is worried because their upcoming release, Assassin's Creed Shadows, looks like it's probably not going to fare too much better either. You can look at the like to dislike ratio on the latest trailer for it. 24,000 likes to 152,000 dislikes on this. So I think Ubisoft is expecting Assassin's Creed Shadow to be another embarrassing failure to them, and having a huge string of failures, that's something they don't want to go to their investors with. So I think it's in their interest to try to, hide how bad their sales figures are, so they can go back to how things used to be, where they can try to spin it in a positive way and lie to their investors and hope to keep their company afloat as a result of all this. But I don't think it's ultimately going to work out for them. What they should do is something that everyone has been saying, which is listen to your audience and make better games. But that's something they're just incapable of doing, because they've also said in the past that they understand a lot of this DEI stuff that they've been shoehorning into the games is probably a contributing factor as to why they're failing. But at the same time, they say that they're also true believers in that cause, so they're not going to change course on that one. So they're going to just keep pushing that. So that's why they probably want to end up getting it so that we don't know how bad their games really are. But like I said before, even if we don't have the concurrent player counts, people know if their games are failing, and they might try to spin it to their investors for a time, but that's ultimately not going to work out for them. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to click that like button and share this video out there, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.